Hey guys, okay, let's start with Act 4, Scene 4. In Act 4, Scene 4, we are in a plain in Denmark, and this is kind of going back to our subplot, the whole Fortinbras, Norway subplot. So, we actually see Prince Fortinbras at this point, and he enters and he has his army behind him, and it's like hardcore war stuff. And Fortinbras addresses his captain. He says, "Go, captain, from me, greet the Danish king. Tell him that, by his license, Fortinbras craves the conveyance of a promised march over his kingdom." So, evidently, if you guys will remember, when Voltimand and Cornelius came to the King Claudius to ask him if they could have safe passage across Denmark to enter Poland, evidently Claudius said, "Yeah, no probs, come on." So, that is what he's there for. So he goes, "You know the rendezvous. If that his majesty would aught with us, we shall express our duty in its eye and let him know so." So he's telling his captain, he's like, "Go tell King Claudius that we're here, and if he would like to see us, if he would like for us to present ourselves to court, we would be more than happy to do so." And the captain says, "Yes, I will do it, my lord." And Fortinbras goes softly on. And then Fortinbras exits, and the army kind of pans off, and then we have Hamlet, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern, and they come in. And Hamlet, as the captain is passing, he addresses him, and he's like, "Good sir, whose powers are these?" And he says, "They are of Norway, sir." And Hamlet goes, "How purposed, sir, I pray you?" So basically, what is your purpose of being here? And, I messed that up. He goes, "Against some part of Poland." So when he says how purpose, he's like, "What are you doing here? Who are you coming to face?" And he's like, "Poland." Hamlet goes, "Who commands them, sir?" And he goes, "The nephew to old Norway, Fortinbras." And Hamlet says, "Goes it against the main of Poland, sir, or for some frontier?" So are you going expressly for the main part of Poland, or some kind of part off to the side? And he goes, "Truly to speak, and with no addition, we go to gain a little patch of ground, that hath in it no profit but the name. To pay 5 ducats, 5 I would not farm it." So the captain's basically saying, no, we're just fighting for this tiny little plot of land that's not even worth 5 ducats. Not even 5. Like, it's just tiny and not even worth it. And he says, "Nor will it yield to Norway or the Pole." So it's really not good to Norway or Poland. It's not even a big deal. And he says, "A ranker rate should it be sold in fee." And Hamlet goes, "Why, then the Polack never will defend it." And he says, "Yes, it is already garrisoned." Hamlet says, 2,000 souls and 20,000 ducats will not debate the question of this straw. This is imposthume of much wealth and peace that inward breaks, and shows no cause without, why the man dies. I humbly thank you, sir." So Hamlet's just like, well, I don't understand why you would have all of these men, all these, or even if it's not even worth any ducats at all, then why is it worth breaking peace for? And he's like, but who's to know why a man dies, or who chooses, what a man claims to be important or not important? And so for this part, he's just like, "I thank you, sir." And so the captain says, "God be with you." And then they exit. Rosencrantz comes in. "Wilt please you go, my lord?" Because they're trying to push him toward England. And Hamlet goes, "I'll be with you straight, though a little before." So everybody exits, and Hamlet's still on stage. And Hamlet begins to address, and he goes, "How all occasions do inform against me, and spur my dull revenge. What is a man if his chief good and market of his time be but to sleep and feed?" So again, we have Hamlet, who is starting to pontificate on, why am I here? What use is a man if all he does is eat and sleep? Right? And so he continues, "Sure he that made us with such large discourse, looking before and after, gave us not that capability and godlike reason to fuss in us unused." So he's like, why would God give us ambition or things that we need to do for us not to use it? So it's pointless. So he continues, "Now whether it be bestial oblivion, or some craven scruple of thinking too precisely on the event, a thought which quartered hath but 1 part wisdom, and every 3 parts coward, I do not know why yet I live to say this thing's to do, sith I have cause and will and strength and means to do it. So again, he's questioning, why have I not exacted revenge? Why have I not killed Claudius yet? I have the will and the strength and the means to do so, but yet I do not do it. And so he continues, examples gross as earth exhort me. Witness this army of such mass and charge led by a delicate and tender prince. And also it's really interesting here because we get an idea of how Hamlet feels about Fortinbras. We've seen Claudius. Claudius thinks that he's hot, young, and ambitious, and not like hot in a hot way, but like hot, like he's quick-tempered. And Hamlet here is more sympathetic toward him, and I think that probably comes from the fact that Hamlet is in a very similar position as Prince Fortinbras, because his father he's lost a father very recently as well, so I think together there's a connection. So anyway, Hamlet says, delicate and tender prince, whose spirit with divine ambition puffed mixed mouths at the invisible event, exposing what is mortal and unsure to all the fortune, death, and danger dare, even for an eggshell. Rightly to be great is not to stir without great argument, but greatly to find quarrel in a straw when honor's at the stake. So he's kind of thinking about the idea that Fortinbras has brought all of these men, this army, to gain this tiny little piece of land that doesn't seem very important or significant, but yet that's Fortinbras' goal. That's what he wants to do, and he's pursuing it. And Hamlet's kind of lamenting the fact that he is not as quick to action as Fortinbras is. And so he continues. And he goes, how stand I, then, that have a father killed, a mother stained, excitements of my reason and my blood, and let all sleep? And at this point, he's starting to work himself up again, which we see Hamlet do a lot. He gets sad about the fact that he's not doing anything, the fact that he's wishy-washy about the situation, and then he kind of whips himself into a frenzy. So he goes on, when honor's at stake, mother stained, excitements of my reason and my blood, and let all sleep. While, to my shame, I see the imminent death of 20,000 men, that for a fantasy, a trick of fame, these 20,000 men are going to die for just this tiny little plot of land. And he goes, whereon the numbers cannot try the cause, which is not tomb enough and continent to hide the slain. And that's a really cool thing, because he's saying that the plot of land that they're going to go and fight and die for is not even big enough to bury all of them in it once they die for the cause. And he says, oh, from this time forth, my thoughts be bloody, or be nothing worth. So I like that, because he's kind of like, yeah, it's time to die. Alright, so then we enter Act 4, Scene 5, and at this point we have another court scene. So we have Queen and Horatio on stage, and the Queen is upset, visibly, and she's like, I will not speak with her. And a gentleman says, she is importunate, indeed distract. Her mood will needs be pitied. What would she have? And the gentleman goes, she speaks much of her father. Says she hears there's tricks in the world, and hymns and beats her heart, spurns enviously at straws, speaks things in doubt that carry but half sense. Her speech is nothing, yet the unshaped use of it doth move the hearers to collection. They aim at it, and botch the words up to fit their own thoughts, which as her winks and nods and gestures yield them, indeed would make one think there might be thought, though nothing sure, yet much unhappily 'twere good she were spoken with, for she may strew dangerous conjectures in ill-breeding minds. So, of course she's talking about Ophelia. The gentleman is talking about Ophelia. Ophelia has started to behave in a madness. She has gone mad because her father has been killed. Her beloved has forsaken her, and she is all alone. And it has driven her to an actual madness, whereas Hamlet's been pretending to be mad. Ophelia is finally so broken that she is in fact mad. And so the gentleman expresses that she's talking in the air and she's making gestures to things that don't exist. And so the queen, and evidently Ophelia wants to see the queen. And so the queen goes, let her come in. Horatio exits. He's called the gentleman here. He exits, and then the queen says to us, she says, to my sick soul, as sin's true nature is, each toy seems prologue to some great amiss. So she's saying, it seems like one bad thing happens, and it's just when it finally kind of ends, then another bad thing happens. And so full of artless jealousy is guilt, it spills itself in fearing to be split. And this is really interesting, too, that she's talking about guilt, because if you remember, King Hamlet, when he appears to Hamlet as the ghost, he tells him to be kind to his mother and to allow her own guilt to prick her bosom. And that's what happens. You know, the queen is tormented by her own guilt. And then Horatio comes back in, and he has Ophelia. And Ophelia is just, she's in and out. She's in and out of kind of knowing what's going on and not what's going on. And so she goes, "Where's the beauteous majesty of Denmark?" And the queen goes, "How now, Ophelia?" And then Ophelia begins to sing, "How should I true love know from another one by his cockle hat and staff and his sandal shoon?" And this is interesting because she's talking about how does one know who their true love is. Of course, we know that Ophelia is suffering because she thought Hamlet was her true love. And the queen goes, "Alas, sweet lady, what imports this song?" And Ophelia goes, "Say you nay? Pray you mark." So she's like, "What? What did you say? No, listen to this." And then she starts a new song, right? She switches here. She switches from Hamlet and what is true love, how am I supposed to know this? And this part she goes, "He is dead and gone, lady, he is dead and gone, as at his head a grass green turf, and at his heels a stone." So she's switched the focus from Hamlet back to her father Polonius, who is now dead. And the queen goes, "Nay, but Ophelia," and she goes, "Pray you mark," which basically means shut up and listen, right? And so she continues singing, and she goes, "White his shroud as the mountain snow." We know a shroud is something that covers the dead. And then the king comes in. The queen looks at him, and he's like, "Alas, look here, my lord." And Ophelia's still in her own little world singing. And she goes, "Larded all with sweet flowers, which be wept to the grave did go with true love showers." And the king just addresses her. He's like, "How are you? How do you do, pretty lady?" And Ophelia goes, "Well, God dild you. They say the owl was a baker's daughter. Lord, we know what we are, but know not what we may be. God be at your table." And the king says, "Conceit upon her father." So she must be thinking about her father. And Ophelia goes, "Pray you, let's have no words of this. But when they ask you what it means, say you this." In this particular song, she is going to go back to Hamlet. And she goes, "Tomorrow is St. Valentine's Day, all in the morning bedtime, and I am made at your window to be your Valentine." And a maiden, that's like a virgin, somebody who's pure and pristine. And then she goes, "Then up he rose and donned his clothes and duped the chamber door, let in the maid that out a maid never departed more." So what she's saying is the maid who is in the room, she was once a maid, then he enters the room, and then he puts his clothes back on, and then he leaves the room, and she says, and that maid will never leave that room a maid again, because now she's, not a maiden anymore. So we get the idea that Hamlet and Ophelia probably did have a physical relationship from this. And the king goes, "Pretty Ophelia," because this is some pretty, scandalous stuff that she's singing. And so the king's like, "Oh, my dear." And then Ophelia continues. She's like, "Indeed, law without an oath, I'll make an end on it." And then she sings, "By justice and by Saint Charity, alack and fie for shame. Young men will do it if they come to it. By cock they are to blame. Quoth she, before you tumbled me, you promised me to wed." And of course that means, before we did the deed. "You promised you would marry me before we did the deed." And then she said, "So would I had done by yonder sun, and thou hadst not come to my bed." So basically what he tells her after she said, "You told me you were going to marry me if I did this, and I did this." And he replies back that, "Well, if you wouldn't have gone to bed with me, I would have married you." So it's not very, it's sad. So we get the idea that Ophelia and Hamlet did have a physical relationship, that this physical intimacy sort of escalated her pain in their separation. So then the king goes, "How long hath she been thus?" So how long has Ophelia been talking out her head? And Ophelia goes, I hope all will be well. We must be patient, but I cannot choose but weep. To think they would lay him in the cold ground. And here Ophelia, she's back a little bit. And she's imagining Polonius being laid in his tomb and how cold. And she goes, my brother shall know of it. And so I thank you for your good counsel. Come, my coach. Good night, ladies. Good night, sweet ladies. And she's just, she's ready to leave. And she's like called the coachman. She's like, come on, let's get in the coach. Let's go. And so it's really sad. And then she leaves. And the king calls Horatio over and he goes, follow her close, give her good watch, I pray you. And then the king turns around and he says, oh, this is the poison of deep grief. It springs all from her father's death. But we know as an audience, it doesn't spring all from her father's death. It's a culmination of everything. Her loss of Hamlet. And he says, oh, Gertrude, Gertrude, when sorrow comes, they come not single spies, but in battalions. So sorrows do not come as singles, they come in multitudes. And so he says, but in battalions, first her father slain, next your son gone, and he most violent author of his own just remove. So here, Claudius is making sure that Gertrude realizes that this is Hamlet's own doing. Nobody is responsible for Hamlet's behavior except for Hamlet. Because Claudius has got a dog in this hunt. He doesn't want anybody to know that. And he continues, thick and unwholesome in their thoughts and whispers, for good Polonius' death, and we have done but greenly and hugger-mugger to inter him. So, one thing that he's worried about is that people are going to start talking about the fact that Polonius is missing. And when it says in hugger-mugger to inter him, it means that they buried him in secret. So nobody knows. And so everybody's going to start whispering, oh, where's Polonius? What happened to Polonius? Isn't that weird that Polonius disappeared the same time Hamlet was sent to England? What's going on? So, divided from herself and her fair judgment, they're talking about Ophelia now, so they've moved on. Without the which we are pictures or mere beasts, last inasmuch containing as all these. Her brother is in secret come from France. So they've heard that Laertes is coming back from France. And feeds on his wonder, keeps himself in clouds, and wants not buzzers to infect his ear with pestilent speeches of his father's death. Wherein necessity of matter beggared, will nothing stick our person to arraign in ear and ear. Oh, my dear Gertrude, this like to a murdering peace in many places gives me superfluous death. So Claudius is just beside himself. This thing that he thought that he had contained is just exploding. Things are falling apart. Laertes is on his way home. He knows of his father's death, and they don't know how he's going to react when he gets there. And then we hear a noise. Boom! And the queen's like, alack, what noise is this? And the king is like, where are my Switzers? And the Switzers are like the guardsmen. And he's like, let them guard the door. And then this gentleman comes in, and it's like, what is the matter? And he's like, save yourself, my lord. The ocean, over peering of his list, eats not the flats with more impetuous haste than young Laertes in a riotous head, or bears your offices. So, evidently, the noise is Laertes, and he is back from Paris, and he's angry, and he has angry people with him, and he's banging on the door. And so the gentleman's like, king, get out of here, you've got to get out of here. And he says, the rabble call him lord, and as the world were now but to begin, antiquity forgot, custom not known, the ratifiers and props of every word, they cry, choose we, Laertes shall be king. So Claudius was probably worried about Hamlet trying to be king, but at this point he needs to worry about Laertes, because Laertes is like, oh yeah, it's going down. So, caps, hands, and tongues applauded to the clouds, Laertes shall be king, Laertes king. So the queen gets all in a huffy, and she's like, oh, how cheerfully on the false trail they cry. Oh, this is counter, you false Danish dogs. So she calls them a bunch of Danish dogs, and that they're false and awful. So then there's another noise, and the king's like, oh, the doors are broke. And then Laertes, armed, he's ready to stabby everybody. And the Danes come following in, and it's just like riotous. And Laertes is like, where's the king? Sir, stand you all without. And the Danes are like, no, let's come in. Because Laertes is like, no, I'm going to handle this. Y'all stay. And the Danes are like, no, we're coming too. And he's like, no, squad, stay back. And Laertes says, I pray you give me leave. And they're like, all right, handle it. And so they retire. They stay at the door. Laertes busts in. And he's like, I thank you. Keep the door. Oh, thou vile king, give me my father. And the queen's trying to calm everybody down. She's like, calmly, good Laertes. And Laertes is like, that drop of blood that calms proclaims me bastard. So he's saying, I no longer have a father. Cross cuckold to my father, brings the harlot even here between the chaste unsmirched brow of my true mother. So the fact that nobody's telling me what's happening makes, if my father's dead, then I'm now a bastard. And he says, and not telling me the truth, you might as well just call my mom a prostitute. And the king is like, whoa, simmer down now. What is the cause, Laertes, that thy rebellion looks so giant-like? Let him go. Gertrude, do not fear our person. There's such divinity doth hedge a king, that treason can but peep to what it would. Act little of his will. Tell me, Laertes, why thou art thus incensed? Let him go, Gertrude. Speak, man. So I like it here, because Claudius is like really appealing to the fact that Laertes is a gentleman, and he won't stab him in the face. So he's just kind of like trying to de-escalate by being super calm. So, Laertes goes, where is my father? And the king says, dead. So he confirms all the rumors for Laertes. And the queen, the first thing she goes is, but not by him. No, he totes didn't do it. And the king is like, shh, woman, let him demand his fill. Let him finish asking everything. Let me give him all the information he needs. And Laertes is like, how came he dead? I'll not be juggled with. To hell, allegiance, vows to the blackest devil, conscience and grace to the profoundest pit. I dare damnation. To this point I stand, that both the worlds I give to negligence. Let come what comes, only I'll be revenged most thoroughly for my father. Now, it's really ironic here because we have Hamlet, who has to revenge his father. We have Fortinbras, who wants to revenge his father. And now we have Laertes, who wants to avenge his father. So we have a lot of boys who want to kill people because their fathers are dead in this play. So now Laertes is ready. But Laertes is going to handle this much differently than Hamlet handles this. So it's kind of interesting to see the two characters mirror one another, how they behave after a father has been murdered, and how they exact their revenge. So he says, I'll be revenged most thoroughly for my father. Who shall stay you? My will, not all the world, and for my means I'll husband them so well that shall go far with little. Now, as we go through this, you'll notice the king doesn't tell him who killed his father. He kind of keeps it from him. So he continues. He says, good Laertes, if you desire to know the certainty of your dear father's death, it is written your revenge. That sweepstake you will draw both friend and foe, winner and loser. So the king here is like, you need to calm down, and you need to know exactly who killed you, because you don't want to kill friends who are friends, but you also need to be careful of friends who are enemies. So let me help you. Calm down. And so Laertes goes, no, I want to kill none but my enemies, none but his enemies. And he says, will you know them then? So he's asking him, will you know the difference? And Laertes goes, to his good friends thus wild, I'll open my arms, and like the kind life-rendering pelican, repast them with my blood. And the king, now pleased that Laertes is starting to simmer down, he goes, why now you speak like a good child and a true gentleman. That I am guiltless of your father's death, and am most sensibly in grief for it. It shall as level to your judgment pierce as day does to your eye. And then, at this point, the Danes in the back are like, let her come in! And we don't know who her is. But Laertes kind of diverts his attention, and he's like, how now? What is this? What noise is that? And then Ophelia comes in, and generally she comes in, some productions she's half-dressed. Some productions she's wearing a weird costume. But has all of these flowers, and she's like completely loopy at this point. And Laertes, just on sight, knows that Ophelia has lost her business, like she is no longer there. And so he looks at her and he says, "O heat, dry up my brains. Tears 7 times salt, burn out the sense and virtue of mine eye. By heaven thy madness shall be paid by weight, till our scale turn the beam, O rose of May. Dear maid, kind sisters, Ophelia, O heavens, is it possible a young maid's wit should be as mortal as an old man's life?" So he's drawn the contrast of the death of Ophelia's sanity and the death of his father Polonius, of that of an old man. And he says, nature is fine in love, and where 'tis fine, it sends some precious instance of itself after the thing it loves. And so he's breaking, because he's just lost his father, and now he's realizing that he has lost his sister as well. And at this point, Ophelia starts singing, and she's singing about the burial of Polonius. And she's like, "They bore him barefaced on the bier. Hey no, naughty, naughty, hey naughty, and on his grave rained many a tear. Fare you well, my dove." And Laertes says, "Hadst thou thy wits and didst persuade revenge, it could not move me thus." And I like that line, because what he's saying here is that if Ophelia had her wits about her and she ran to Laertes and she said, "You must revenge our father. You must slay the person who murdered him," he was like, that plea would not be as effective as seeing you in this state of madness. The fact that you are so incredibly mad spurs me further to avenge this murder. So that's what he's saying here. And Ophelia goes, "You must sing down a down, and you call him down a, oh how the will becomes, it is the false steward that stole his master's daughter." And Laertes goes, this is nothing's more than matter. So he's like, this doesn't make any sense. And then she starts handing out flowers, and she's giving everybody particular flowers. She goes, "There's rosemary, that's for remembrance, pray love remember, and there's pansies for thought." And Laertes says, "A document in madness, thoughts in remembrance fitted." And Ophelia, "There's fennel for you, and columbines, there's rue for you, and here's some for me. We may call an herb of grace o' Sundays, oh, you must wear your rue with difference. There's a daisy, I would give you some violets, but they withered all when my father died. They say he made a good end." Now, as she's giving each one of our characters a particular flower. So, depending on the character, she gives them a particular flower. And during this time, the flowers meant certain things. Like, for example, we have some stage direction at this point. Let's see if I can find it in this book. This book is far more helpful. And it kind of gives you an idea of what the flowers mean and who she hands them to. If I can find it. Okay, so she'll give the queen the fennel and columbines. And these plants back in Elizabethan England were identified with unfaithfulness. So she gives those to the queen. And then to the king, she hands him rue. And rue signifies repentance. And we're about to have a scene where Claudius is going to try to repent. And then she says, "And here's some for me." And in that case, she gives herself a flower that represents sorrow. And so it's really interesting. A lot of times in the Alabama Shakespeare's Garden, they have each one of these flowers planted. And it's kind of an interesting thing. It's neat. So then Laertes goes, "Thought and affliction, passion, hell itself, she turns to favor and prettiness." So she's talking about the flowers and things. Even though we're living in hell itself and all these terrible things are happening to her, she's still trying to focus on what is beautiful. And that's in sharp contrast to Hamlet, right? Who's like, the world is an unweeded garden. It's nothing but weeds. But then we have Ophelia, who's like, oh, there's nothing but flowers. So it's kind of sad. So Ophelia continues to sing. She sings this little song here. "I will spare you my sing-songy," rendition of that. Then Laertes goes, "Do you see this, O God? And the king says, Laertes, I must commune with your grief, or you deny me right. Go but apart. Make choice of whom your wisest friends you will, and they shall hear and judge twixt you and me. So the king's like, we can't, there's nothing else we can do here. So go, be alone with your grief, but think about which friends you hold most dear, and we will reconvene here, and I will give you counsel. And he says, if by direct or by collateral land they find us touched, we will our kingdom give, our crown, our life, and all that we call ours to you in satisfaction. So he's like, we are going to fix this for you, and if we can't fix it, if I can't make it better, you can have all of this. You can have my crown. You can have my kingdom. I will make this right for you. And he says, be you content to lend your patience to us, and we shall jointly labor with your soul to give it due content. So he's telling him that he's going to help him in any way that he can. And Laertes goes, let this be so. His means of death, his obscure burial, no trophy, sword, nor hatchment, or his bones, no noble rite, nor formal ostentation. So Laertes is lamenting the fact that Polonius wasn't given a proper burial with the proper, funeral and mourning and all of that. And he says, cry to be heard is toward from heaven to earth, that I must call it in question. And the king says, so you shall. And where the offense is, let the great axe fall. I pray you go with me. Because it's going to serve the king very, very well if Laertes kills Hamlet. Because it would seem like Hamlet would deserve that, because he killed his father. So this is turning out to be quite convenient for Claudius. So we're going to stop there, and we will pick up at Act 4, Scene 6 in the next video. Okay, bye y'all.